And then I will share some examples. Sorry, the recording message seems to have taken me out of presentation mode. Okay, there we are. Then I will share some examples which I hope can generate some thought-provoking discussions later. First of all, it's important to explain that whilst the state of Israel is just over 70 years old, next year the National Library will mark 130 years since its initial conception. Here is an image of our first reading room, which contained a collection of books that had been gathered in Poland with the express purpose of sending them to Jerusalem as a place where scholars and sages will gather to benefit from the treasures of Jewish learning. It was not conceived as a place for public engagement at all. That wasn't to happen until over 100 years later. It first became the library at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. It was called the Jewish National University Library. And here you can see our very, very first early places. And actually you can see where we had to evacuate on Mount Scopus during the War of Independence. And here is a picture of our reading room now in our current building. Then in 2007, the NLI embarked on an ambitious program of renewal as set out in our mission statement as enshrined in the National Library law. Here is the mission statement. The goals of the National Library are to collect, preserve, develop, and endow collections of knowledge, heritage, etc., etc. Now, this statement really emphasizes that we see our role not just to collect and document and to preserve, but also to endow, to share our collections, to make them accessible to the people of Israel in all its diversity and to the Jewish people worldwide. In fact, the shorthand for this goal is that we aim to become the library of the Jewish people, which is a hugely ambitious undertaking. And in fact, it would be possible to say that we are the library of the Jewish people in the extent and breadth of our collections over time and space. And I'm just giving you, before I talk about our collections, here is a glimpse into the future. This is the building that's currently being built in Jerusalem next to Israel's parliament, the Knesset, which will be a stunning cultural venue in the city, and we hope it will open in a year's time. So just to talk about our collections span a huge amount of time. From the 7th century to today. And perhaps even more importantly for this discussion, our collections come from literally all corners of the world. Here you can see how they're divided across 4 thematic areas: Judaica, Israel, Islam and the Middle East, and humanities. And we have some examples here. In particular, the Judaica collection is the largest, and it reflects the many centuries of rich Jewish life and history across Europe. And we do not just have books. Here is a list of some of the many formats that we have in our holdings. I'll just give you a moment to look at those. In fact, we could envisage a library, and ours in particular, as a metaphor for dialogue. And I'll be talking in a minute about this dialogue being the theme of the European Day of Jewish Culture this year. Our collections have evolved since 1892, but each layer added is another part of the conversation between writers, thinkers, and historians through the generation. So the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And here you can see the same book, which is the Haggadah, the book that Jewish families read on Passover, on the night of Passover at the Seder. And here is a very old, beautiful Haggadah from 1738, but then a reinterpretation of a communist Haggadah from Moscow in 1922. So that gives an idea of what we mean by a dialogue across time and space. However, if we understand the concept of the Library of the Jewish People to mean reaching out and engaging with the Jewish people across the world, not just the collecting part, then we are facing a very different and more complex challenge. How do we make people aware of our collections and generate a personal and even emotional connection to them? How do we bring our connections to life so that they feel relevant to people's lives today? We know that increasingly heritage institutions, not just the NLI, are bringing their collections to life through educational and cultural initiatives, attracting new audiences to come into their buildings, but also going outside to meet the community on their terms. And of course, now that we're working virtually, as we're doing now today, the possibilities grow exponentially. So this has been one of the silver linings of the pandemic. Indeed, the main focus of the NLI's renewal program for reaching new audiences within Israel has focused on education, cultural programs, and an extensive program of digitizations, making collections accessible through online platforms. You can see some examples. We have a very rich newsletter and a platform of blogs. And here is a platform that displays all of our map collection online. I know that you had a presentation from Sabrina Katani, head of the archives here in Forlì. However, our archives are located in Jerusalem, often thousands of miles from their place of origin. So if your meeting is focusing on anchoring archives to a specific place, a space, a venue, or a cultural route, this is another bridge that we have to cross. Not to mention the fact that in particular with archives, we're talking about materials that are predominantly text-based, which, while fascinating to expert researchers, may not be so visually appealing or easily understood. And in our case, they are often not in a commonly used language, but in Hebrew characters, Yiddish, Ladino, and other Jewish languages. And here's an example of a community register from Verona, which I think is a mixture of Italian and Hebrew texts. These provide very rich resources for understanding the history. They contain the notes of all the different discussions and deliberations and elections and financial matters of the way the community is self-governed, but they need explanation, they need facilitation in order that people can really appreciate them. So we need to find a way to be relevant at the global and local level at the same time. And this is why Gesher LeEuropa, a bridge to Europe, was conceived by the National Library of Israel, together with our funders, the Rothschild Foundation Hanadiv Europe, to connect Jewish heritage institutions and communities in Europe with our library, with both our collections and with our people. And in a way, it's viewed as a startup to try out different ways for our library to work internationally. Here's just the three areas that we're focusing on. Professional training, our flagship program is at the source. Education, we target young learners in school and in informal education, as well as lifelong learners. And culture, engaging with the wider public. And we include our valued partnership with AEPJ in that. So I'll now share some examples with you. At the source, first of all, professional training. This is the flagship program for the National Library of Israel internationally, training and guiding people working across many different heritage institutions to help them understand their Jewish materials, to catalog, describe, and preserve them. Of course, we cover many technical and professional areas of archiving, such as I'm sure you must have heard from Sabrina. But in many cases, the starting point is helping archives recognize that they even have Jewish collections, which are often spread across different funds, and to understand the importance and value they present for enlightening Jewish local history, as well as helping Jewish families overseas trying to retrace their roots. Here's an example of colleagues that came from Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia to the library. We did a specific program for the Baltics. And often it's just a small change in practice that can make a big difference. I'll just give you an example. When we visited the historical archives of Lithuania and Vilnius, they showed us very proudly a collection of posters, hand-drawn posters advertising cultural events in the ghetto, the Vilna ghetto in Vilnius, where Jews were incarcerated before they were deported. And these were beautiful posters, but they were in Yiddish and Hebrew characters. They were displaying them upside down, because in Hebrew, we write from right to left, not from left to right. So even that small tip, that small piece of information made a massive difference to the way they were able to understand what they were doing. So we have been focusing our training regionally, as I mentioned, in two stages. First, we partner with a local historical archive who can provide rich materials give local context, and then we host the training course in Jerusalem at the NLI to help cement the professional links between colleagues at the National Library and in Europe. You might be interested to know that we're planning to create an online platform for this training course so that many more heritage professionals from many countries can benefit from it. And we'll be covering education and cultural programs as well as the more technical skills. And I'll leave my email at the end of this PowerPoint. I also want to mention another important project that we're doing in Italy, though not with archives. This is called Italia Books. It's an ambitious undertaking to catalogue every Hebrew book in Italy. Ultimately, it's also about helping local communities appreciate and connect with their heritage, and in this case, with the immensely important legacy of Hebrew book printing in Italy. The NLI has, over the years, developed a rich database of primary resources for educators. We realize that we cannot expect teachers to spend hours going through our catalogues of millions of items, literally. So we've created ready-made packages of material adapted to their needs. And here is an example you can see. And as part of the Bridge to Europe initiative, we've created an English language version of this database, including over 1,000 items, some of which are also available in French. Here you've got some more examples. This is for a Jewish holiday called Purim. And here's just the opening page of our materials in French. I would like to say it's archival materials, letters, photographs, ephemera, posters, newspapers, etc., which are the majority of the materials we use for educational resources rather than our books. I'm going to give an example. I'm going to try and share another document as part of this, this presentation, so you'll have to bear with me, but it reflects how we have used the incredible archive we've received only in the last few months about an iconic figure in recent Jewish history called Chana Senesh. Chana was born in Budapest in 1921 and emigrated to Israel in 1939. She settled on a kibbutz and was a prolific writer, but she also felt very strongly that she had to help the Jews in Europe. And she took on this incredible mission and was parachuted into what is now Croatia, and unfortunately was caught, interrogated, and sentenced to death, and was put to death in 1944. So I want to explain how we have used her story to create, hang on a minute, to create an incredible educational experience. I hope you can see now that I'm flicking through a series of materials that we've created based on her incredible life. This has been created by our education department. These are some photographs. I'm just finding it hard to go through here. Right here we can see. These are papers that we have from her childhood, letters that she wrote, and she also wrote some very famous songs. These are part of the legacy that was created afterwards. You can see here a letter from her brother to her brother, which was censored by the British. And then we also created the educator's guide to this whole idea of the mission, that we're asking them to sort of interactively go through a mission as though they're on a mission to discover more about Chana Senesh. So I'm going to go back to the presentation. All right, good, that worked. We also create packs for older learners, what we call our lifelong learning series. And we've recently created a series of short films, A Look at the Jewish Year, which feature National Library of Israel staff discussing and showing items from our collections, archives and manuscripts that relate to Jewish holidays. Finally, to culture. Our partnership with AEPJ has enabled us to connect with hundreds of people visiting local Jewish heritage sites across Europe. The European Day of Jewish Culture focuses each year on activities around a designated Jewish-related theme, and the NLI develops an exhibition based on our resources, which is then delivered to coordinators by email for translation and for them to produce it. And we create it in a format that's modular so that it can be adapted to the venue in which it's going to be displayed. Here we've had several iterations of this previously Jewish languages, which I think is still hanging up in the museum in Pitigliano in Tuscany, Europe and the Jewish diaspora and Jewish journeys. And here's an example from the most recent iteration this year, Dialogue, where we focused on the different ways that, that dialogue is expressed in Jewish culture and our interface with wider society. So we've been creating many different types of cultural products virtually, such as this is our online reading room series of events, which we started over COVID, which features speakers from all over backgrounds and from all over the world. Often these are people who have worked on our collections for their research. And of course, we look forward to going back to live events in Europe. Here's a slide from the Jewish Cultural Festival in Krakow. If you see on my right, you see the right-hand side, this sort of installation space, a screen. That is a special installation that we had curated by an artist based on music. The theme of the whole festival was Jerusalem, music of Jerusalem and images that we have in Jerusalem. And it was a very sort of sense around experience, which worked really well. So by working with partners like AEPJ, we can use our collections to connect people in the Jewish diaspora with their historic legacy, as our collections reflect them, and many communities have rich Jewish collections literally on their doorsteps in both Jewish and state and national institutions, but they are often not aware of them. And they're certainly not being used in schools or in informal education. Oops, I don't know what this is doing here, sorry. Let me just go here. Sorry. Some may argue that we should stay within our traditional roles, like preserving history and traditions through our collections, providing services to researchers and historians, and that we should be careful about going beyond this remit to use our materials to educate, transmit knowledge and ideas, and to make claims that through this we can influence wider society. I'm not sure we should keep our distance from the local context. Josh Teplitsky, in his book Prince of Press, talks about the thin boundaries between books as objects and the social worlds that create them. I think the renewed role of the National Library is to tell the Jewish story. Storytelling is a basic way to impart knowledge and understanding, and it's something that has to happen in partnership locally with educators, tour guides, cultural bodies, with people like yourself. But what will make a huge difference to this learning experience and make it genuine and not just tales of folklore is adding in authentic archival materials to show that the story with which we are engaging, the listener is actually rooted in real history and real people. Sometimes very small items can be immensely powerful. And here I'm showing you the note that was found in Hannah Senish's clothes, in her garments, after she had been executed, which is her last note to her mother, which speaks volumes and is incredibly moving. We also have other items in our archives. For example, you might have a prayer book that someone kept with them through challenging times. And there may be signs actually at the venue. Our friend Jeremy Lee, who I know is involved with cultural tourism and is based in Jerusalem, was talking to us at an AEPG meeting about the indentations on the side of a gatepost, which marked where the gates of a ghetto had once existed in a city in Europe. So these things are all very powerful examples of how a single item can be used to create that emotional and learning connection. On a final note, we need communities to participate in telling the story, as what we collect and document today will be the historic legacy of future generations. And I just want to explain that we have launched the Jewish European Ephemera Collection to collect and document items that people just have as part of their normal, ordinary Jewish life that they may consider not important. Together, they make an incredible rich tapestry of Jewish life at that particular time. You can see in 1935, there was a bullfight advertisement to commemorate 800 years of the birth of Maimonides, the very famous Jewish, Spanish, and Egyptian philosopher. And here we have in the middle a piece of German ephemera reflecting various campaigns that were taking place then. And on the right-hand side is a digital Haggadah. I mentioned the book that we use on Passover that was created online for a quarantine Seder, because one of the most recent initiatives we've done under this collection is to collect COVID ephemera. We have now 3,000, even more, digital COVID pieces of writing, emails, posters, and we're encouraging people to send us these because we want to document how Jewish life and Jewish practice has been impacted by the pandemic. And this is an ongoing project. Unfortunately, we're hoping that we can really say that the COVID-19 is history. This is the way we've been advertising it. So we need to use our heritage resources to create a participative experience that inspires and sparks the imaginations of people to feel that they are also part of their local story, that it's not just about looking back in time, but that the materials we have and that we generate now are part of the archival continuum. And this is, of course, a huge challenge in the digital age, but I think that that's a topic for another conference. So thank you very much for listening. I'll be happy to take any questions, and please see my email here.
Thank you, Karen, for your very inspiring and interesting speech. And